Aquavitae, the water of life, better known as whiskey. And here in Scotland, where I am right now, it's kind of a big deal, and not just in the pubs, but in the country's history as well. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we explore whiskey's past in Scotland, this time on Drinking History. So I'm here at the Balmoral Arms in Scotland, just down the way from Balmoral, where the Queen is as we speak. I'm actually recording this in where we're going to be eating dinner in a couple hours, and gorgeous place, but it is a working restaurant, so apologies for any noise during this recording. Now on this trip, I have been making several different videos. I'm going to be having a video come out on medieval haggis that I made and food around the historical Macbeth, but I was going to do a short video on whiskey. But as I've been traveling around, going to different distilleries and frankly drinking my way across the country, I've learned so much about the history of this drink that I figured it needed an entire episode. The only thing is, because it's kind of impromptu and because it's on what Robert Burns called the Scotch drink, there isn't really a recipe because you can't make Scotch whiskey at home, one, if you're not in Scotland, but two, it's probably illegal. And the way that they typically drink it over here, it's just with a couple drops of water, end of recipe. So I figured this would focus mostly on the history of whiskey here in Scotland, and I'll kind of talk about what makes whiskey whiskey when in Scotland. But first, I want to try a sip of this Aberlour whiskey, which is made about an hour away in Aberlour. Here we go. Oh, that's very, very nice. It's almost devoid of that peatiness that you get with a lot of the whiskeys from the islands, which I actually really like that peatiness, but some people don't. It's very smoky and kind of fiery. This is very, very smooth. It has more of a spice to it. Am I getting cloves? Maybe, maybe not. But it is quite nice. I feel a dram of this would be a perfect way to finish off a meal that you can make at home from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. Well, here I am back home and ready to get cooking, and I don't just mean for the show, but for my weekly meals from HelloFresh. I mean, 2 weeks of haggis and sticky toffee pudding was all well and good, but let me tell you, I really missed my Mexican food. So last night, I made the taqueria pork bowls with corn esquites and cilantro. One of my favorite things about HelloFresh is the sheer variety that they have. One night you could be having Mexican, and the next night it's Chinese or Italian or hamburgers. And they have meals to fit everyone's lifestyle, whether you're a vegetarian, pescatarian, or looking for something fit and wholesome. And they're wonderfully easy to make. All the ingredients get shipped to your door in recyclable packaging, and everything comes pre-portioned so the prep time is minimal. It's homemade food without a lot of hassle. So if you want to start making wonderful meals like this, go to HelloFresh.com and use code TASTINGHISTORY16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes plus 3 surprise gifts. That's HelloFresh.com using code TASTINGHISTORY16. And now, back to Scotland. Oh good, you're back. Now, whiskey is made all over the world and it can vary greatly from place to place. Essentially, it can refer to most any alcohol derived from a grain that is then distilled into a spirit and aged. But here in Scotland, where the drink is typically not spelled with an E, the rules are quite specific on what makes a Scotch whiskey. Typically, there are only 3 ingredients: water, malted barley, and yeast, though some others can use grains like wheat and rye. The only other thing that can legally be added is caramel color, though it has nothing to do with caramel other than the actual color. It adds no flavor to the whiskey and is there simply to add consistency to the look of the whiskey over the years. Now, whether it's single malt or single grain, meaning it's produced at one distillery, or if it's a blend of different whiskeys from different distilleries, whiskey must be the only ingredient. And while that seems kind of obvious, it's actually not, because until rather recently, like the 20th century, they would often add in things like sherry or port to mellow the flavor. Additionally, the whiskey has to be made here in Scotland, and it has to be 40% or 80 proof alcohol. Perhaps most importantly though, to be considered whiskey in Scotland, it must be aged in oak barrels for at least 3 years and a day. This is the part of the process that gives whiskey most of its color and most of its flavor, making the drink something that you actually want to enjoy. And it's that regulation that it has to be aged that probably led the drink to be as good as it's become. The irony is that the person who came up with the regulation was a teetotaler, and it was done in an effort to destroy the whiskey industry. See, during World War I, the politician David Lloyd George declared that between the overuse of Britain's barley supply for whiskey and the drunkenness that the drink caused, he declared, "Drink is doing more damage in the war than all the German submarines put together." And in an effort to cripple the whiskey industry with regulations, he introduced a law that required the drink to be aged in barrels for an extended period of time. He actually wanted 10 years. What ended up happening was at least 3 years. So basically, on 3 years and 1 day, the whiskey makers opened up the barrels, took a taste, and realized, oh, well, this is actually better than what we had before. So those are the rules that describe a modern-day Scotch whiskey. And it is a far cry from what whiskey was earlier on in history. So make sure you subscribe to Tasting History as we travel back to the origins of whiskey in Scotland. So there is a lot of debate over where whiskey was first produced. Scotland, Ireland, Wales? Frankly, nobody really knows, and honestly, the answer would really depend on what you consider to be whiskey. But one of the earliest mentions of a proto-whiskey comes from Ireland, and as I'm in Scotland, I better not say that too loud. In 1405, we are told Chieftain Richard Magranel died at Christmas by taking a surfeit of aquavitae. Mine author saith that it was not aquavitae to him, but aqua mortis. That is, it wasn't the water of life, but the water of death. But aquavitae is what people called the distilled liquor that would become whiskey. See, while water of life is aquavitae in Latin, in Gaelic it's uisce beatha, and that was eventually shortened to uisce or whiskey, meaning water. Though this early drink was nothing like whiskey today, it was probably going to be more like a flavorful rubbing alcohol than the stuff in this glass. In fact, it wasn't even always made from grain. As late as 1600, descriptions say that it could be made from grapes, and in 1658 the term is used to describe wine mixed with honey and herbs, not even distilled. But more often than not, from a fairly early period, whiskey was made from malted barley, as is evident by the first mention of the drink in Scotland. The 1494 Scottish Exchequer rolls called for 8 bowls of malt to Friar John Core, wherewith to make aquavitae. And the king at the time, James IV, was said to be quite the fan of the drink, and records show that a barber actually gifted him a bottle when he was in Dundee. And he must have really enjoyed this bottle, because in 1505 he gave the Guild of Surgeon Barbers in Edinburgh a monopoly on producing and selling whiskey within the city. Now today you might think twice before going to a surgeon who offers you whiskey right before performing the surgery, but back then, when surgeons and barbers were one in the same, you're probably going to be safer drinking the whiskey than getting cut open. And frankly, I kind of agree with him, because back then, whiskey was thought of as medicinal, and it sure is today, in small amounts. Being moderately taken, it sloweth age, it strengtheneth youth, it cutteth phlegm, it abandoneth melancholy, it relisheth the heart, it lighteneth the mind, it quickeneth the spirits. Truly it is a sovereign liquor if it be orderly taken. Though not all whiskies were created equal, in the early 17th century, a gentleman whose parents cruelly named him Martin Martin described several varieties made in the Western Isles of Scotland, one being 4 times distilled. And this by the natives is called uisce beatha beul, which at first taste affects all the members of the body. 2 spoonfuls of this last liquor is sufficient dose, and if any man exceed this, it would presently stop his breath and endanger his life. But as whiskey grew in popularity, whether twice distilled or 4 times, it did have its detractors. By the end of the 16th century, the Scottish government was actually worried that whiskey was going to be a cause of famine, because they were using up all of the barley to make alcohol rather than bread. And in 1609, the Statutes of Iona declared that when it came to the Hebrides Islands, a main cause of the poverty and disorder of the islanders being their excessive drinking, all general sale of wine or aquavitae is to be stopped under severe penalties, reserving liberty, however, to all persons in the islands to brew whiskey and other drink to serve their own houses. So you could make just enough for your own household. Now, there was also part of the provision that let the chieftains of the island make basically as much as they could sell to the lowlanders, because even back then there was an idea that the lowlanders handled their alcohol better than the highlanders, a stereotype which quite unjustly has carried on for several centuries afterward. And these were the first of many laws that treated the Highlanders more harshly than their lowland neighbors. Though despite the attacks on the whiskey business, it continued to thrive, and so in 1644, the Scottish Parliament decided instead of making all of these rules, they would just tax it. And thus began a centuries-long game of cat and mouse between distillers and the exciseman, or tax collectors. And the relationship between these parties was often rather complicated. Sometimes it was very contentious and even became violent, but at other times there was a mutual respect. And that respect often centered around the whiskey itself. As one exciseman from 1736 wrote about the Highlanders, "The ruddy complexion, nimbleness, and strength of those people is not owing to water drinking, but of the aqua vitae, a malt spirit which is commonly used in that country, which serves both for victual and drink." And while the exciseman was never particularly popular, you'll do well to remember that one of Scotland's favorite sons, the poet Robert Burns, started out as an exciseman and would have probably continued in that line of work had he not developed a talent for the quill. And even with the taxes, whiskey had become, in the words of an English rent collector from 1724, the glory of the country. And it even played a role, the veracity of which is up for debate, in one of Scotland's most pivotal moments. The night before the Battle of Culloden, Mr. John Maitland, a presbyter of the Episcopal Church in Scotland, he administered a Holy Eucharist to Lord Strathallan on the Culloden field, where the gallant nobleman received his death wound. It is said with oatcake and whiskey, the requisite elements not being attainable. And rather cruelly, after the Jacobite cause had been lost, an English Colonel Watson wrote from Fort Augustus that to root out those involved in the rebellion, one should interview those who were known to be sympathizers, then fill him drunk with whiskey as often as he may judge proper, which I'm confident is the only way to penetrate the secrets of these people. Also, I have discussed the Jacobite Rebellion briefly here on the channel before, but if you are interested in that or anything that has to do with Scottish history, I definitely suggest that you watch Bruce Fumi's channel, Scotland History Tours. He has become a good friend. We've actually recorded some stuff while here in Scotland, and we had the benefit of him taking us around Scotland and telling us history in the car. It was absolutely fantastic. His passion for history is just, the way he tells these stories, nobody else can do it like him. So go watch his channel. I'm going to put links in the description to some of my favorite videos of his, as well as where you can actually get him, hire him to take you around Scotland the next time you visit. But back to the whiskey. So, following the Jacobite Rebellion, many facets of Highland life were effectively banned. Things like kilts and tartans and bagpipes, even the Gaelic language itself became banned for many people. It was very, very complicated, but effectively it was banned for many Highlanders. And even whiskey kind of got a bum rap. It was so associated with the Highlands that many of the gentry in the lowlands who were trying to make nice with the English all but abandoned whiskey in favor of things like claret and brandy. Though it seems that this water of life did still hold some sway, as whiskey from the Highlands was only fitted for the most vulgar and fire-loving palates. But when a little of the real stuff from Glenlivet or Arran could be got, it was dispensed with as sparing a hand as Curaçao or Benedictine. Scene change. They had to get started doing dinner service downstairs, so I came upstairs because I didn't want to be that guy. Anyway, in 1785, Robert Burns, that same poet who had once been a tax collector or exciseman, actually wrote a poem extolling the virtues of what he called the Scotch drink. Let other poets raise a fracas 'bout vines and wines and drunken Bacchus, and crabbit names and stories rack us, and grate our lug. I sing the juice Scotch bear can make us in glass of jug. O thou, my muse, guide old Scotch drink, inspire me till I lisp and wink to sing thy name. Burns wrote this poem in part to bring back some pride to the drink, as he would later do, and probably more famously, with haggis. And whiskey needed some pride right now because it was about to face its toughest trial. Now, illegal stills had been a thing ever since those first regulations in the early 1600s, but by the end of the 18th century, new laws were being enacted that made practically all whiskey in Scotland have to be made on the sly. And it went all throughout the country. At one point, there were 8 legal stills in Edinburgh and 400 illegal stills. But the regulations were definitely more draconian for the Highlands, effectively banning all whiskey produced there. This was truly the age of the illicit still. They would be hidden under bridges and in houses, even in barns and churches. And there was a practice of labeling whiskey barrels with the name sheep dip, because sheep dip was a poison that they would put on sheep to stop them from getting bugs and fungus. Smuggling ran rampant, as did corruption between the distillers and the excisemen. And when the government cracked down, one of the ways that they did so was to offer a reward for people turning in stills. But what actually happened was that the distillers themselves would take their old stills, turn them in, take the reward, and go buy a brand new still. Though ironically, all of this regulation made it so that the Highland distillers were able to refine their production, producing a better whiskey than the Lowlands, who were making it en masse and so kind of fell into the trap of shoddy mass production. Now, Parliament eventually realized that the more they regulated, the more people just broke the law. So in 1823, they passed the Excise Act. This put a fixed license fee plus payment per gallon on any whiskey distilled, and it made it far more equitable throughout Scotland. The industry began to boom, and in 1848, when Queen Victoria and Prince Albert began summering at Balmoral Castle, just down the road from where I am right now, they ordered in casks of whiskey from Lochnagar Distillery, making the drink socially acceptable among the gentry once again. Now, just after this, whiskey benefited from a bug, the same bug that absinthe benefited from in France. It was called phylloxera, and it decimated the grapevines of most of Europe, and hence the wine industry. And so, while the wine industry was trying to get back up on its feet, absinthe came in and filled the gap in France. But in England, Scotch whiskey came down and made sure that the country didn't have to go a decade of being sober. This is the time period when many of the famous whiskeys that are still enjoyed today began production. And it was also the first time that blended whiskeys really became an art form. This period also saw a return of marketing Scotch in a way that it hadn't seen for quite some time. First, echoing Robert Burns, distillers played into the Scottishness of the drink, adding tartans and Scotty dogs and kilted bagpipers to their ads. When we visited the Dewar's Distillery in Aberfeldy, we learned that in the early 20th century, to help with their marketing, they purchased the quintessentially Scottish painting, The Monarch of the Glen, for £26,000, which is a lot of money today, but back then was an extraordinary amount, costing pretty much as the distillery. And to get their money's worth, they put it on bottles and posters and all sorts of marketing material. And while we were there, we also saw that they resurrected another marketing ploy that hadn't been used in quite some time, and that was to tout whiskey as medicinal. They had a bottle of Dewar's labeled anti-diabetic whiskey, and many distillers followed suit, one calling itself a wholesome stimulant that ministers to good health and neither affects the head nor the liver. And while I feel that marketing ploy has gone away, Scotch whiskey has definitely not. In fact, it has only grown over the past 150 years. Ironically, the only place where its consumption has seemed to decrease is Scotland itself. Around 1800, the average Scot drank a pint of legal whiskey a week and an untold amount of illegal whiskey. Well, by 1900, that amount had dropped to about a half pint, and it's continued to slowly drop ever since. But based on how many distilleries I've seen around the country and how many people are drinking in every bar that we're at, I don't think that we have to fear Scotch whiskey's demise anytime soon. And I, for one, am very glad because I have definitely come to enjoy a glass of Uisce Beatha. So thank you again to the Balmoral Arms for letting me use their restaurant and now their bedroom for filming, and make sure to keep an eye out for more Scottish episodes coming up in the next couple months, and I will see you next time on Drinking History.